Okay, great. So we'll get started here. So today, as we progress, we've had now, I guess, two talks. And Adam, when we kind of kickstarted this thing, he had asked me sort of to go through a variety of topics that, are beneficial to folks that are maybe a little more seasoned in the chapters, but also some that maybe are just starting out, whether it's in leadership or just in general, trying to raise resources and, whether that be through in-kind services, through donations of individuals, companies, foundations, etc., across the country. So today is more of the fundamentals. So again, for folks who are with me tonight, many of you are more experienced than others, but we're going to walk through some of the typical basics. I'm going to skip around a bit, and I'm going to send these slides out as well. I'm going to have Adam send them around to all. Um, but what I've noticed, at least from SPJ National, is we have a lot of awesome chapters, a lot of wonderful leaders that step up as volunteers across the country. Like I said, some have come from a background where they've had to raise resources for their organizations or other entities as well, or other nonprofits. Um, and it's also the leadership changes frequently with the staff. I'm sorry, with the chapters. And so what I try to encourage is as much as we can to sort of systematize, even at the chapter level, how we're approaching funders. What I saw happening with a lot of the different chapters reaching out to the same people, asking for the same donations for this event or that event, very little kind of coordination, or I saw kind of that change of leadership happening where we kind of just started fresh every single leadership cycle of, okay, now who are the companies we're going to reach out to in town, even though the last maybe president of the chapter had already reached out to the same person last year. And so what I am trying to encourage is as much as we can to try to set up maybe a process as light as that can be, but something to look at our relationships that we're forming at the local level around the chapters and to make sure that we're actually treating these potential donors, whatever they might be, whether it be company or individual or foundation, that we're treating them, obviously with respect, but also trying to optimize what we can fundraise from them in the future. So really looking for at the local level, a lot of the potential funders are not necessarily looking for these massive projects. They're looking for something very specific, whether it be maybe through an event that's having an impact on the community. I know some chapters have a scholarship program, I keep hearing. Some are doing work around the First Amendment, et cetera, press freedom. And so there's a lot of chapters have different initiatives going on, some commonality. I know a lot of them do events as fundraisers. And I know, Celia, you mentioned that you're doing one, obviously. But again, thinking through the lens of the funders, what they're looking for, and who might be appropriate supporters for you, depending on what you're doing, the program, the event. I've had some chapters I've talked to that are going after really, really big, billionaire funders for a project that they only need $1,000 for. And so it's also matching up the scope of, what you're trying to do to the resources that could be out there. For me, in fundraising, I've never found a shortage of resources that are out there. It's more of aligning the projects and the cause of what you're trying to raise money for and making folks really understand that, and also to feel good about how they're supporting, being transparent, and being consistent with what you're actually saying you're going to do with those funds. So again, really just today we're going to skim through looking at kind of reducing the fear of kind of fundraising. I know there's obviously different things that can arise. I've heard from some members of different chapters that sometimes they're covering, for example, on corporate fundraising, sometimes chapter members are actually covering stories about companies in town. So there's a little bit of a conflict there. So making sure that we're really knowledgeable about the funders in our space and also the right people that are part of the chapter can approach them. And then also the sort of a little bit of the how, what is actually working? How do you actually approach potentially a new company or a new individual to support your project or your event? Right. And so these are some, I already mentioned a few. Now, community foundations, many of you are probably very familiar with them. For me, they're just a conglomerate of many donor advised funds, which are often set up by individuals in the community that want to do philanthropic work. And so, really, all that entity comes down to, it boils down to individual relationships and understanding who at these community foundations in town may have set up a fund there that could be applicable to what you're doing or to what you represent. And often you can dig out that information. You can see them supporting other similar projects. You can see sort of where they're giving, where they're sponsoring, and sort of kind of ascertain like who are folks you should go after. Same thing with individual donors, local sponsors, and then in-kind support. In-kind support is very much focused around sort of the non-cash contributions. But through all of these, and obviously then there's corporate tied into local sponsors, I always say for me, my fundraising is always very individual centric because truly individuals make up all of these. When you think about it, an individual works at the company. An individual is tied often to the foundation. An individual could give you a direct donation. So when I think about approaching potential funders, of course, the nuances are different. Some might have, like a company might have a process you have to go through to submit for a sponsorship for an event, let's say. A foundation might have a grant proposal you need to do, but getting to know and winning those individuals that are behind those groups and making them aware of what you're doing and why it's important and how they can be evolved, that's what it all boils down to. All right. I already mentioned a bit of the community foundations. If you're not aware that there is one in your community, I always say, just search Google, to be honest, or just do a search, find the community foundation, go through some of their funds that are there. Maybe there's some that are applicable to the work that you're looking to do, to see ones that are good fits. Also, you could always reach out to some of the leadership at the community foundation, mentioning even your local chapter and saying, we're doing work in town, not sure if we're a good fit for anything y'all have, but I'd love to talk to someone or learn more. Or is there any events coming up that maybe someone from our chapter leadership could come to share more about what SPJ is about, uh, and what we do in town, or inviting their leadership to come to an event you might be holding. Okay, individual donors for chapters, obviously looking at former and present members to participate, whether that be through sponsoring or even giving or even attending events. And also your event attendees. I do see a lot of attendees to local chapter events that are not members, that do not give, except outside of attending the event. And so for me, that's a ripe opportunity of folks who may have come to the event. Maybe they were invited by a peer or a chapter member, and actually trying to cultivate them as supporters. There's a reason they came. Hopefully, it wasn't just for a nice, chicken dinner, but they maybe, but they do have a taste for who you guys are now and what you're about, and maybe there could be opportunity there. And I saw that recently with one chapter. They had an event attendee who made a large contribution because he was inspired by coming to the actual event. So, sorry, was there a question, Tammy? Oh, I thought I saw. Okay. And then obviously local professionals that are relevant and on a professional level, understand what SPJ is and what you guys are doing and finding ways to leverage their relationships perhaps to get to other community supporters like companies or foundations. All right. Sponsors, obviously thinking in line with whether it be your very values or even what kind of initiative you're raising funds for. So that's where, I just throw up a few examples here. I know, Celia, you mentioned earlier about universities, starting there for the specific project you're doing, but obviously that can change. And looking for folks that might be stakeholders in the space or might have a causal interest. Like I said before, for me, it's finding affinity for what you're doing. It's not always just the capacity. The capacity often comes once you find a really good align to what you're trying to raise funds for. All right, I mentioned in-kind support. I am seeing this more and more with some chapters that there are more people in the community that are, that are SPJ members or not, that are coming forward and offering different services that are helpful to the chapter, even down to fundraising services, of folks that are willing to help maybe around an event and volunteer. All of that's really, really awesome and helpful to the bottom line. One thing I'll actually say about in-kind support as well, I mean, all these donors, a big pitfall is not stewarding them. And I will say I see that a lot, and especially for in-kind supporters because we often overlook them because they're not cash. And someone donated photography from a recent event, and we forget to really thank that person, or maybe just the chapter president calling them and say thank you so much for doing that for us. That was a great help. So I will definitely mention that. Trying to make sure even our in-kind supporters, we don't forget about them at the chapter level and making sure that we're honoring them and keeping them engaged. So in terms of what funders actually care about, This is looking, at least what I've seen, is definitely community connection. Consistency is, I think, one of the biggest things that I see a lot of. There's a lot of projects that ask for money that say they're going to, engage 13 students around journalism in our community, and then they never tell the funder after 2 years that they did anything. How many students were engaged? Was it successful? Was it not? Why? Um, is it continuing on, or was this just a one-off? And I see a lot of one-off projects that are like exciting. Say we're going to do this, and then it just stops. So I would say thinking through at the chapter level some of the core aspects of what you're trying to raise funding for, and really talking about, are these going to be one-off opportunities or are these consistent? Are we going to do a scholarship program to support 3 students a year? And if we are, let's make sure when we're fundraising for it this year that we're really telling people this is going to be a multi-year thing. This is not going to be a one time and done. And if that's the case, sometimes also you can try to get, let's say at the individual level, try to get individuals to even commit to multi-year and say, that's great. You want to do a scholarship. I understand you need to raise 10,000 a year to do it. I will give $500 each year for the next 3 years. I'm in for that. And that's really great because then your chapter can really support, can look at, okay, well, maybe next year we want to go for 15,000. And we know that 6,000 is already committed because of the work we did, because the previous leadership really solidified some of that support. And then, of course, the impact, right? Coming down to what was it that actually is tangible that you did with resources, even if it's putting on a great event. Was that event successful? Why or why not? And translating to the sponsors and the supporters, the impact of their works through pictures if they didn't attend, through just ongoing, quick thank you, and what it meant to the chapter. Okay, and then again, coming back to the clear purpose piece, just making sure, again, this is where I see a lot of sort of drift in terms of chapters understanding what are they trying to do, right? Why are we raising money? What is it at the very, if you boil down everything, why do we need resources? Is it just to have a nice event, or is it about supporting youth in journalism? That's a big tenet that we want to get behind. So this is not so much like a strategic plan per se, but understanding at the chapter leadership level, understanding, why are we raising resources? And at the end of the day, what is it really for? Great. Is to bring people together. Is that because you want to have better mentorship, better camaraderie amongst journalists, better support networks? Why are we doing this? Having that purpose can really help you when you're doing outreach to potential supporters. I'm going to skim through a few of these because these are some pieces that I've already mentioned, but obviously the connection. They definitely these funders want to invest in groups that already have some kind of connection with the wider network, right? If they're a local company, they want to know that your chapter, has a finger on the pulse and has connections. And, I will say some, let's say companies don't necessarily always care about their benefits per se from an event, but they do care about how they're going to be represented in the community, right? They want to align themselves with projects with groups they can be proud of, and that they wouldn't be afraid to have, let's say, in a press release or something like that, saying they were a supporter. So that's really big. And then I mentioned consistency, again, just having a good track record with the work that you're doing, or your work that you're proposing they're going to do at the chapter level. Uh, Leadership wise, I think I was mentioning this earlier. Obviously there is transition through leadership with every chapter. And so for me, it's really thinking through what are some ways we can keep our communication or efforts to, let's say, build friendships or fundraise. What is a way that we can keep that consistent and not have it get confused where, 2 people are reaching out in the same year from the same chapter, forget not realizing that someone else had reached out. And so and that can be as simple as even just having like a shared spreadsheet where we're tracking, these specific companies in town, who is the point of contact and what was the date they were contacted. And great, now you hand that to the next chapter leadership and say, this is what we did last year, keep it going. It's not perfect, but I have seen some chapters do it really well, and I've seen some that really just start fresh every time, and it causes a lot of confusion from the funders' perspective. And then I've seen a lot of, let's say, prospectuses for events, for example, or even just potential solicitations of funders that are very complicated. And obviously, we have journalists in the room, so a lot of wonderful writers. And so sometimes how we're pitching it to potential funders is a little too heavy. And there's a lot of information in there, and the potential funders aren't consuming it all. And so I always try to keep this more of a sequential conversation. And as we move along, being very clear with, breaking down the impact very easily with what we're trying to do. Let's say it's an event. What's the event look like? What the date? What kind of people come? What are the benefits? What are ways for them to sponsor, get supported, and then continue that conversation versus throw them like a 20-page packet saying this is everything about our chapter and what we do in the community. Please give. Usually those get unread and sort of kind of put by the wayside. So this is something too. You can always argue each of these points. Sure, you could help if you had maybe someone to focus on development, maybe a nicer website, sure. But having all of these at their peak does not necessarily mean you're going to raise more money. I've seen wonderful projects that have amazing websites, even multiple staff members raise nothing or very little. So just something to think about as you try to raise more resources, not necessarily waiting until you have all of this together. For me, it's, getting the core of what you're trying to do, making sure that's fleshed out, and then starting to begin some conversations with people. Not just sending an email to 50 potential funders with a 19-page packet, but really trying to get some actual conversations with the right person, or the right person at a company, or even the right person who believes in what you're trying to do, or introduced through a friend or a member. Um, all right, and then I already mentioned some of these pieces, but definitely clarity around what you're actually asking for. I see that a lot where we get confused and we get nervous and we start throwing out like 7 different things somebody can support when really we just want them to sponsor an event, but we feel like they really might like this idea. So coming into it, being very clear with how you want their support, what does that look like? Personally, as I go after funders, I like to actually give them a number, even the companies or foundations, even being very specific of what we need and what we hope for from them. I've never had someone get offended for asking for too much. I've had maybe one person get offended from asking for too little from them. And I said, no problem, we can easily double that. Um, that's a good problem to have, I guess. And then relationships. I mean, that's everything. I mean, especially with chapter fundraising, any relationships we can ride and them make a warm introduction to a potential funder or an individual, um, definitely going to go much further and much faster to get in the door. Okay. And then, I mean, small asks. I mean, this is another idea with at more the local chapter level, trying to get, you know, I always say let's say you make a prospectus for an event that you're going to have. I never like to undersell it in terms of offering too many low levels, but I will say, as you're fundraising for that, let's say it's your first time hosting an event at your chapter level, you definitely want to get some potential supporters. So you definitely got to know kind of the landscape. Have you done this event before? Has it built a reputation? Therefore, we can ask for higher sponsorship tiers, or do we need to just get people in the door? And let's try to get some smaller sponsorships as well, just to have some supporters that we can build on year to year. And that's the goal, is for every chapter to really start cultivating this strong group of past and present sponsors and grow that and retain them, not just have these one-off for this event or that event. That is, in a perfect world, what you're trying to go towards. I mentioned this already, having, good relationships, building the trust, doing the warm introductions. And then also, that mind shift. This is probably the biggest thing, is just shifting from really going to people that you're not just asking for money. I have a lot of folks who say, I really don't like to ask for money. And for me, it's bringing that opportunity to the potential funder. So if their goals and their mission aligns with you, and this opportunity you're giving them, it's going to be a happy marriage and you're going to get support and you're going to sustain that relationship. If it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. And you keep moving on, you keep finding potential partners for you. But I always try to take the money aspect out of it and see it as more of an opportunity. You're just the messenger, you're the facilitator, you're bringing a wonderful opportunity to support journalists in the community to potential funders, and you're hoping that they see the value and you can share why. and that they might consider supporting you. Okay, so I'm breezing through this, and I'm hoping a few people on the call might have some questions for me. Um, but again, just remaining visible. That's another big thing is what is SPJ at the chapter level? What are you doing in your community that is also warranting external support? So if you're asking local companies for support, what is it that you're doing that actually is benefiting the community, and how do you translate that consistently? Also, the chapter leadership and the membership, um, how are they representing and how are they seen in the community is also pretty powerful for getting potential supporters. Okay, I'll skip around. And then, little call to action at the end here. Just simply saying, for some folks who are getting their feet wet for the first time, maybe with fundraising, just trying to kind of bite off a piece at a time and identify some potential funders. And I encourage you to mix it up. Maybe look at a foundation, look at a company, and maybe just look at an individual in town or maybe that you're connected to that you can kind of warm up this conversation and practice on and maybe even make an ask for support. And that could be maybe around an event, it could be around a specific program you're doing, but definitely something that you only get better by actually doing it. So yeah. That is my quick chat, which for some might say, well, I knew some of that, most of it. But I don't know anyone on the call if you have any questions for me. If not, we'll keep it short here. But I guess Celia or Tammy, any comments or questions?
I think you really do a good job of giving advice about what to do and how to do it. Just covering philanthropy a lot. You get a sense of what donors care about and what doesn't work, and you kind of hit all the high points. Well, but I will definitely. I'm looking forward to the slides. I was hoping that Stephanie Overman, who was doing the heavy lifting on this project,
Mhm.
but got called away because her mom got sick. That's what you always deal with volunteers.
Yeah,
Um, would be here too, but I will share them with her.
great.
And I think this sort of advice reinforces the approach we've been taking
Mhm.
and will help us build on it. So thanks a lot for this, Lucas.
Sure, great. And like I said, to all the chapters that, have attended the calls and that haven't, anytime you want to set up a separate time to chat or new leadership coming in, I'm happy to
Absolutely.
talk.
Yeah.
I'm happy to talk to the chapter even in a meeting and just share some basic thoughts on how they can be more effective with the fundraising aspect. But I know, Celia, you know it better than most in terms of that consistency. Consistency is key. Even with that turnover, as much as we can mitigate that loss year to year of leadership, right, and that knowledge, it'll be better off for the chapter. So. Cool. Well, thank you, Celia. And Tammy, I don't know if you have any questions. If not, I'll cut the call, but
Yeah.
Mhm.
Do you feel like donors more often want to support a particular event or initiative rather than, here's this organization that does good work in the community, let's just generally support them?
Yeah, I think it comes down to, honestly, I'd say it comes down to the chapter and what they've been doing for years. Because there are some chapters that have had an established scholarship program, for example, for like 3 decades. And external members of the community respect that and they see it and they see the impact. So they've done a good job at doing that. So therefore, they might be able to approach a potential supporter for that scholarship or invite them to sponsor the event because they know that's the money's going towards that scholarship. That's very impactful. So I'd say it really comes down to the chapter and what they've been doing and how they've been cultivating their external relationships. Some groups like companies obviously tend to be more in line with sponsors for events. Sure. Some private family foundations, for example, don't like events at all. And they say, no, we don't do events. But we will make a grant if that scholarship program is interesting. Or they might say, we don't do scholarships. And you say, well, we're doing a program around, freedom of the press in our local community, and we're trying to raise 10,000. Would you give 2,000 towards that? Can we send you a proposal? So again, it is not the same for each funder. I do find that it can differ based on, let's say, the chapter's track record, but then also where the funders have predominantly fit. But I would say sometimes that changes. I've had private family foundations that tell me for decades, or not decades, years, hey, I don't do anything about scholarships. And then all of a sudden they meet someone who really was amazing that got a scholarship. And they say, you know what? We would consider giving a scholarship because we've met someone that you've changed our perspective. So I would say that I've seen that. Honestly, I did see even with COVID, I saw, and maybe Silly, maybe you saw this too, but I saw some funders change some of their funding priorities. And I don't think it was just COVID. Maybe there's other external things happening. But I have seen the past few years funders starting to shift some of their established parameters that maybe you saw on their website for the past 10 years. Maybe they extended, maybe they focused on health before, but now in Cleveland, Ohio, they mentioned, we're also focused on youth education now. And for private family foundations, sometimes that's also the next generation coming up. Sometimes that's children in the private family foundations that now their parents are trying to hand them the reins and say, hey, we've set these resources aside for philanthropy. We've told you be a good person, and now it's your turn. And now that child is older and says, you know what, but that's great that you've always supported, juvenile justice, but I care a lot about animals in town and I want to make more grants around that. And so sometimes you start seeing a lot of I'm saying the private families in particular, but you see this with some corporations too, that based on the political climate, based on external factors, can sometimes shift their focus as well. I saw that a lot even with the last election. I saw some companies that started to shift the types of nonprofits or the types of projects that they were going to get behind. Like, for example, around social justice, you saw a lot of companies, unfortunately, shift from supporting specific social justice type causes. So again, that can happen, and I think you're going to see more of that in the next 5, 10 longer years as more of the next generation of philanthropists grow up and inherit a lot of these donor advised funds or private foundations. I bet you're going to see a lot shift. That's why I keep saying like getting to that individual is key because there might be someone growing up who's really, maybe they did the student newspaper, for example. Their family had never supported anything journalism related, but now they're behind the organization, the foundation, and they add that saying, I want to see the support journalism in our community. So, yeah, that was a really long answer. Sorry. Um, anything else? If not, thank you guys for hopping on. And like I said, I'll share this video and the slides as well. And feel free to reach out anytime. Thanks again for the folks that came.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much.
All right. Bye-bye. And bye, Gigi.